independent woman malarkey I went on about to my dad as an act of defiance and rebellion is out the window now. When he's opposite me with those eyes and the hair that swoops into them, it too can't get enough of them, it seems. Independence is the last thing on my mind. He excites me in places that really shouldn't be excited in a girl of my age. But what can I do? It's not as if I can control this. Do we choose who we fall in love with? Of course we do. We pick that person who stands out above all others to invest our affection in. That's our choice, isn't it? Perhaps not. I assure you it doesn't feel that way for me. When all other forces of nature and logic point me in one direction, I'm walking in the other, as if on autopilot. Lust comes into it, sure. I mean, have you met my Romeo? Oh, the pleasure in just calling him mine. He's beautiful, with lashes that seem to fan you when he bats them. But more than anything, my love for him is a force more powerful than the will of my parents, but then that's not difficult. As a teenager, defying my parents is almost a necessity. More powerful than the will of society, and even greater than the will of nature. What I've surrendered to is a power greater than all of these. So no, I had no choice in the matter. This whole love saga had nothing to do with me. I was planted from the beginning. Damn you, Romeo. You had no right to put me in such a vulnerable position of submission. That night I was supposed to be solidifying my relationship with Paris, or rather my arranged partnership, for want of a more accurate term. Supposedly a match made in heaven, but technically it was a match made in my father's study, probably over a considerable amount of spirit, and with the impact on our reputation prioritised above all else. Me? My opinions? Pfft, that's hardly relevant when it comes to who I'll be spending the rest of my life with. Charming, though cocky, and not in an attractive, confident way, just in a please stop grinning at your self-proclaimed brilliance way. Paris really is a good man. The best of the worst, perhaps. Though even that's overly harsh. If it hadn't been for the Montague intrusion on our perfectly civilised party, I might have considered him to be one of the best. As some say, ignorance is bliss. But then, if that night hadn't happened in exactly the way it did, I may have lived my whole life without knowing love. It went a bit like this. I stood beside my mother, rigid as a board, though trying to soften my limbs and act less like a doll and more like the jovial daughter I was supposed to be, as I was introduced to yet another guest who hadn't seen me since I was this big, with varying hand gestures demonstrating measurements. The fact is, I haven't grown for 2 years now, which is most frustrating since I hoped to be a tall woman, so I might attempt to assert some dominance in a world where I knew that would never really be possible. So all this talk of my height was frankly offensive and tedious. And then the next yet another was none other than Mr. Future Husband. He kissed both my cheeks, and his stubble was at the stage where it stops being attractive and starts being irritating. I smiled tenderly, and he grinned like I'd shown him my naked body. Not that I had much experience of such looks. Not at that point. Mother was gushing, hands all over us both, pulling and pinching and pushing us closer, clearly trying to ignite some spark between us. Save the effort, I should have told her. Claiming the urge for a sudden toilet break, I ducked away, gave myself a moment to breathe away from the situation. Although what preceded left me struggling for breath far more. He had a curious look about him, as though lost, but looking for something. Two things I couldn't imagine going together normally. Like he was searching for something familiar, but in a totally unfamiliar place. Those eyes of his reached mine, and he stared. Totally inconsiderate and impolite. His piercing, unmasked glare was unlike any contact I'd experienced up until then. People weren't supposed to look at each other this way. It was intimate in a way that made me feel almost uncomfortable, but it felt so ingenuous I couldn't look away. He approached me. We talked passionately about kissing. It had barely been a few minutes and we were discussing something far more intimate than I'd ever even witnessed. Rationality had quite swiftly become an unknown concept. Before long, we were acting on our words. I was swept up in everything that was him. But I want to reassure, it's not because I'm an excitement-deprived teenager cooped up with overly controlling Catholic parents who wouldn't understand young love if it was publicly displaying affection under their very noses, though I confess this hasn't helped, that I can hardly eat for want of his lips on mine again. He makes me feel valued with his passion and his restraint, though neither of us have much of that, his complex philosophy and way of looking at the sky that somehow allows him to see every one of the stars that shine down on this petty air. With him, I no longer feel like the means to an end, or a child incapable of anything with any depth. It's almost as though I become someone who has every ability to give as much as they can take. There's a balance and a correctness that buzzes around me like a ringing in my ears when his arms encase me. How can anyone tell me this is wrong when it feels so astoundingly right? I pity those who would be bound to try, if only they knew. So, sure, I admit, right this moment, I'm terrified. But not as much as I'm certain. Certain that I want this, and him, and all that we become and have the potential to become when we're together. Yes, I'm going to do this. But not only for him and the value that he allows me to have. Not only that, but for me too. For the person he has allowed me to start growing into. Because although I'm still only a blossom far from full flower, the woman I feel capable of being around Romeo is greater than anything I ever pictured myself as in the company of the people who brought me into the world and whose genes I share. Yes, I'm going to fake a hideous thing, but with slightly selfish, but far from hideous intentions. It's to you that I raise my glass, Romeo, to our shared health. I'll be seeing you on the other side.